Welcome to the Creative Commons RX podcast. Before diving into this episode, I want to ensure we're all on the same page. This is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the audio content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously. Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we really try to get into the hood of major policy shifts, especially those happening right at the cutting edge of medical science. And today, wow, we've got a big one. We're diving into a landmark regulatory decision. It affects CAR T-cell therapy, one of the most, frankly, exciting fields in cancer treatment right now.
Absolutely. And this isn't just some minor tweak to the rule book. It's really a profound statement. It signals that the entire clinical field has reached a new level of maturity. We're focusing on the FDA's announcement back in June 2025. They decided to eliminate the mandatory risk evaluation and mitigation strategies, the REMS, for 6 approved CAR T-cell therapies.
Right, the REMS. And when you hear eliminating a safety mandate, especially for treatments people call living drugs, it does make you pause, doesn't it? It sounds almost like the FDA is easing up, taking its foot off the brake. But reading the sources, looking into it, it seems to signal the complete opposite, a really deep confidence in the systems the clinical community has built itself.
That's exactly it. It represents a fundamental paradigm shift. You know, for years, CAR T regulation was very much about this centralized, highly prescriptive safety mandate. Rules came straight from the FDA down to the hospitals. Dropping the REMS means the FDA is now saying, okay, we trust the decentralized, peer-developed quality infrastructure that's grown within the clinical community. They're basically acknowledging that the safety systems built from the ground up by the experts doing the work are now robust enough, maybe even better than the top-down checklist.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Let's follow this regulatory evolution. Our mission for this deep dive really is 3 things. First, we need to lay out the complex world of biologics regulation, who regulates what. Second, detail the real burdens, the real-world impact of the old CAR T REMS. And finally, show how these comprehensive peer-developed quality systems, especially FACT-T, gave the FDA the confidence, the proof, to make this shift and ultimately improve patient access. That's the goal, right? Improve access.
Precisely. It's a fascinating story of regulation adapting to scientific and clinical maturity.
All right, so to really grasp why regulating CAR T is such a unique challenge, we have to start at the beginning. What makes a biologic different from a regular drug? Why this special class?
Well, they're fundamentally different beasts. A traditional drug, a small molecule drug, is usually made through chemical synthesis. It's relatively small, predictable, stable. Biologics, on the other hand, come from living sources, humans, animals, microorganisms. Think vaccines, blood products, antibodies. They're large, complex molecules, often mixtures. And that complexity just inherently demands different handling, different oversight.
And cell and gene therapies, CGTs, take that complexity to another level entirely, hence the term living drugs. What puts them in that category?
Yeah, living drugs really captures their dynamic nature. CGTs, like RRT cells, can actually persist in the body. They can replicate, or they can integrate their genetic material right into the patient's own cells. They don't just get metabolized and flushed out like a pill. They can become a functioning part of the patient's biology for years, maybe even permanently. And that persistence introduces risks and challenges way beyond a typical drug. Requires a very cautious approach.
Which explains why the laws governing them are also specialized.
That's right. Your standard drugs mostly fall under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, the FD&C Act. But biologics, because of their source and complexity, are regulated concurrently under the Public Health Service Act, the PHS Act. This gives the FDA additional tools, especially around safety, purity, and things like licensing the manufacturing facilities, which are crucial for these complex products.
Okay, so that dual legal framework helps explain this split within the FDA itself. People hear FDA, but inside there's CBER and CDER. Can you break down that division for us? How do they decide who reviews what?
Sure. It's not arbitrary at all. It really comes down to product complexity and the specific scientific expertise needed. So you have the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, CDER. They handle the traditional small molecule drugs, but also some of the, let's say, less complex biologics.
And CBER, the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, that's where CAR-T lands.
Exactly. CBER handles the most complex stuff, things that require deep expertise in, say, cell biology, virology, immunology, regenerative medicine. So vaccines, blood products, human tissues, xenotransplantation products, and critically for our discussion, all cell and gene therapies, including CAR T cells. These products just demand scientists who understand, for example, the risks of a viral vector or how these living cells might behave long-term in the body.
That makes sense. But didn't things get shuffled around a bit back in 2002? I remember reading about a realignment.
Yes, they did. That's a good point. Historically, CBER handled a wider range of biologics. But in 2002, a significant number of therapeutic proteins, think monoclonal antibodies, interferons, enzymes, were moved over to CDER. The thinking was that, while still biologics, their manufacturing had become more standardized, their actions more predictable, they sort of fit better within the review processes CDER typically used for drugs.
So the key takeaway for you listening is, if the therapy involves changing genes or putting living, potentially replicating cells into a patient, it's definitely under CBER's watch.
Absolutely. And even within CBER, the field of CGTs is moving so fast, they've had to concentrate expertise even further. The specific group reviewing CAR-T and other gene therapies is the Office of Therapeutic Products, or OTP. Having this dedicated office just highlights how specialized and rapidly evolving this area is. It needs that focused attention. #TagTech 1.3, the unique scientific challenges of CGTs.
Right, and that intense focus is necessary because CGTs bring risks to the table that, standard pill just doesn't. This is where it gets really interesting, scientifically speaking. You mentioned 4 key areas of novel risk. Let's break those down. What's the big one?
I'd say the one that demands the most long-term caution is insertional mutagenesis. This is the core risk with gene therapies that integrate into the patient's DNA. You use a vector, often a modified virus, to get the therapeutic gene into the cells. The worry is, what if that gene slots itself into the wrong place in the genome? What if it disrupts a critical gene or maybe activates a cancer-causing gene, a proto-oncogene? This could potentially lead to secondary cancers years later.
And that's not just a theoretical risk, is it? There's history there.
No, it's not theoretical. Early gene therapy trials unfortunately ran into serious issues with this. It made regulators, understandably, extremely cautious. It highlights this fundamental trade-off. The potential for a permanent cure comes with the potential for a permanent, unforeseen complication down the road. That's why long-term follow-up is non-negotiable.
Okay, what about the delivery system itself, the vector?
That's the second area, vector-related toxicities. We use these viral vectors, often lentiviruses or adeno-associated viruses, because they're incredibly efficient at getting the gene delivered. But even when they're engineered to be non-pathogenic, the vectors themselves can sometimes trigger adverse events. Things like immune reactions or toxicity to certain organs, especially if higher doses are needed.
And then the body reacting to the therapy itself.
Yes, immunogenicity. That's kind of a double-edged sword. The patient's immune system might attack the viral vector, which could stop the therapy from working effectively. Or sometimes the immune system might react against the new therapeutic protein that the modified cells are producing. That can reduce efficacy, too, and potentially cause other immune-related problems.
And the last one, the one that really underscores the need for that long-term watchfulness.
That would be the potential for delayed adverse events. Because these CAR T cells are living drugs designed to stick around and sometimes even multiply, problems might not show up right away, not within the weeks or months of a clinical trial. Adverse events could, theoretically, emerge years later. This persistence is why we simply have to monitor patients for 10, 15 years, sometimes longer, to really understand the long-term safety profile, especially regarding that risk of insertional mutagenesis we talked about.
This complexity, particularly with a CAR-T where each dose is made for one specific patient, brings us to manufacturing. We often hear this phrase, the process is the product. Why is that so central here?
It's absolutely critical for autologous CAR-T. Think about it. You
Yeah.
take a specific patient's T cells, you ship them off, they get genetically modified with a vector, expanded in number, formulated, then shipped back to be infused only into that same patient. If any single step in that complex multi-site chain goes wrong, collection, shipping, modification, expansion, labeling the safety and the effectiveness of that final living cell product could be completely compromised.
So it's not like quality checking a batch of identical pills. You have to guarantee the quality and control of the entire journey for every single patient's unique cells.
Exactly. The quality of the CAR-T cells you infuse is inseparable from the quality controls applied at every single point in that manufacturing process. You can't just test the final bag of cells and be sure everything upstream was okay. The consistency and validation of the whole process is the guarantee. And this highly personalized, multi-step manufacturing journey inherently demands incredible vigilance and robust quality systems right there at the treatment center, too.
Okay, so given all those unique risks, those complexities, when the first CAR-T therapies got approved back in 2017, the FDA needed a strong safety net, and that net was the Mandatory Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategy, the REMS. Remind us, what's the basic job of a REMS?
Fundamentally, a REMS is a safety program the FDA can require if a drug's risks are serious enough that the standard label warnings aren't considered sufficient on their own to ensure safe use. The legal goal is simple. Make sure that, out in the real world, the known benefits of the drug continue to outweigh its known serious risks.
And for CAR-T, the REMS was especially tight because there were these two immediate, potentially fatal side effects that needed expert management, like right away. What were those main targets?
Yeah, the focus was really on acute toxicity. First, you had cytokine release syndrome, CRS. This is a massive inflammatory storm triggered when the CAR T cells get hyperactivated. It can escalate incredibly quickly, lead to organ failure, even death if it's not recognized and treated immediately. Second was immune effector cell-associated neurotoxicity syndrome, or ICANS. This covers a whole spectrum of neurological problems: confusion, headaches, severe seizures, brain swelling, often happening alongside or after CRS. These two, CRS and ICANS, were the big reasons the FDA imposed these very strict requirements called Elements to Assure Safe Use, or ETASU.
ETAPIS. Sounds very regulatory, like a checklist you absolutely cannot skip.
That's pretty much what it is. ETASU are specific, mandatory actions that institutions or doctors must take to minimize a specific serious risk associated with the drug. For CAR, initially, the rationale was clear. The field was brand new, maybe only a few academic centers really had deep experience. So the REMS, with its ETASU, acted as this centralized prescriptive tool. It forced a uniform, high baseline of readiness across every single site wanting to offer the therapy, regardless of their background. It was like mandatory training wheels for the whole system.
But let's get specific about those requirements under the old CAR-T REMS. Because, while they came from a place of safety, they ended up creating some really significant hurdles, especially for patients. What do the hospitals and doctors have to do?
Well, administratively, it was quite heavy. First, hospitals had to get special certification for each specific CAR-T product they wanted to use. Not just one certification for CAR-T in general, but one for Kymriah, one for Yescarta, and so on. Lots of paperwork. Second, and this was really the cornerstone for managing that acute risk, every certified site had to prove they had immediate on-site access to tocilizumab. That's the drug, an IL-6 receptor antagonist that's critical for treating severe CRS. If a patient crashes with CRS, you need that drug within minutes, not hours. So it had to be physically right there.
Okay, having tocilizumab ready makes clinical sense. But the rules that hit patients directly, outside the hospital walls. Let's talk about that 4-week proximity rule. That one caused a lot of issues.
It really did. It was probably the most burdensome part, even though the safety rationale was understandable. Because CRS and ICANS typically show up within the first month after infusion, the REMS mandated that patients had to stay close, usually defined as within a 30-minute or maybe a 2-hour drive of their certified treatment center for at least 4 full weeks after getting the cells.
4 weeks. A whole month. If you lived hours away, maybe in a rural area, you couldn't just drive back and forth. You essentially had to relocate. What was the practical impact of that on patients and their families?
Oh, the impact was huge, sometimes devastating. I mean, imagine you finally have hope, this potentially curative therapy, but the condition is you have to uproot your life, and your caregiver has to uproot theirs for 28 days, often in an unfamiliar and expensive city. It forced patients from rural areas, or even just suburbs that were a bit too far out, to shoulder enormous financial and logistical burdens they often weren't prepared for.
We're talking finding temporary housing near a major cancer center, which is never cheap.
Exactly. Housing costs, food, local transportation, plus, and this is crucial, lost income. For both the patient, who's obviously sick, and the caregiver, who often had to take unpaid leave to be there around the clock. For people already dealing with advanced cancer, often financially stressed to begin with, this 4-week proximity rule wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a major socioeconomic barrier. It literally stopped some clinically eligible patients from getting treatment simply because they couldn't afford the month-long stay near the hospital.
A tragic unintended consequence. And even after that month, the restrictions didn't fully lift, did they?
No. Because of the ongoing risk of delayed neurotoxicity, the REMS also advised patients to avoid driving or operating heavy machinery for a full 8 weeks after infusion. So you see, while the REMS was necessary initially to get safety protocols established everywhere, it operated like this blunt instrument. It imposed significant hardship and limited access, which is the opposite of what you want for a potentially life-saving therapy.
Okay, so we've outlined the problem. This rigid, burdensome federal mandate, the REMS. Now let's pivot to the solution, the alternative framework that grew from within the field itself and eventually convinced the FDA to step back. Let's talk about FACT, the Foundation for the Accreditation of Cellular Therapy.
Right, and FACT has been around much longer than CAR-RT therapy itself. It was set up way back in 1996. It was a joint effort between two major professional societies, the International Society for Cellular Therapy, ISCT, and the American Society for Transplantation and Cellular Therapy, ASTCT. It's a nonprofit organization, and its whole mission is to develop and promote rigorous, evidence-based standards for cellular therapy based on peer consensus.
That phrase, peer-developed, seems really important here. This wasn't regulators handing down rules. This was the actual doctors and scientists involved in this complex therapy defining the standards themselves.
That's the absolute key difference. FACT standards represent the collective wisdom, the best practices, as agreed upon by international experts working in the trenches. It's the clinical community defining for itself, this is the level of quality we need to manage these therapies safely and effectively. That makes it inherently a bottom-up standard, and that generally leads to greater buy-in, more clinical relevance, than a rule simply imposed from the outside.
But FACT accreditation is voluntary, isn't it? So how did it become influential enough to basically replace a federal mandate? Why didn't hospitals just stick with the mandatory REMS checklist, which might have seemed easier?
That's a great question. It gained traction for a couple of reasons. First, the leading academic centers and major cancer programs quickly recognized that achieving FACT accreditation was, well, essential for demonstrating quality. It became important for credibility, for participating in clinical trials, for attracting patients and top researchers. Second, and this is crucial for the REMS comparison, the REMS really focused narrowly on managing those acute risks, CRS and ICANS. FACT, on the other hand, demands a much broader, more holistic quality system. It covers everything from the initial patient evaluation through the complex cell collection and manufacturing, infusion, and all the way to long-term follow-up. It forces institutions to build a complete quality ecosystem.
So FACT isn't just about having the right stuff like tocilizumab on hand. It's about having the right processes and systems for everything.
Exactly. It's about demonstrating institutional capability and commitment to quality across the board. It mandates structures for governance, personnel, facilities, data management, process control, the whole 9 yards. Hashtag tag 3.2, the Comprehensive Quality Management QM program.
Let's dive into that cornerstone of FACT-CT, the requirement for every accredited program to have a comprehensive quality management QM program. What does that actually involve? How is it better than just following the REMS rules?
The QM program is really the heart of FACT-CT. It's designed to be a dynamic, integrated system for continuous quality improvement, not just a static checklist. It has several key components. First, rigorous personnel training and ongoing competency assessment. Staff don't just get trained once. Their skills and knowledge have to be regularly verified. Second, extensive documentation, detailed written policies, and standard operating procedures, SOPs, for every critical task. Third, you need validated processes, proof that your procedures consistently deliver the intended results, ensuring control over the entire chain.
And how does it handle things when they inevitably go wrong? How does it drive improvement?
That's through what ACTI calls occurrence management. This is a mandatory system for meticulously tracking, investigating, and implementing corrective and preventative actions, TPA, whenever something deviates from the expected. That includes serious adverse events, but also errors, near misses, accidents, even complaints. And the key difference from just reacting, like the REMS required for CRS, is the preventive action part. FACT requires you not just to treat the problem, but to figure out why it happened, review your processes, and make changes to stop it or something similar from happening again.
Ah, so it's proactive, not just reactive. It's like the difference between having a fire extinguisher ready, the REMS, versus having strict building codes and inspections to prevent the fire from starting in the first place, the FCTQM program.
That's a perfect analogy. FACT really pushes institutions towards building a culture of safety that is constantly learning and improving. It's about systemic resilience.
Can you give us a feel for the scope? What are some key areas the FACT-TT standards cover specifically for immune effector cells, like CAR-T?
Oh, they're incredibly comprehensive. For example, the organizational management standards require clear leadership structures, sufficient resources, and institutional commitment. Personnel and training standards define specific qualifications and experience needed for everyone involved: doctors, nurses, lab staff. Then there's the clinical operations domain. This is where you see direct overlap and, frankly, superiority to the REMIS requirements. It mandates things like adequate facilities, established plans for emergency and intensive care support, and critically ensuring timely access to all necessary drugs for managing toxicities, not just tocilizumab, but steroids, anti-seizure meds, whatever might be needed.
And what about protecting against errors with these patient-specific products? Mixing up doses would be catastrophic.
Absolutely. That's covered intensely under the labeling and chain of identity standards. These impose incredibly strict procedures to track the cells meticulously from the moment they leave the patient, apheresis, to the moment they're infused back in. It's all about ensuring the right patient gets the right cells every single time. The potential for error is huge, so the controls have to be ironclad.
And how does a hospital prove they meet all these demanding standards? What's the accreditation process like?
It's rigorous. It starts with submitting tons of documentation policies, SOPs, validation data, occurrence reports, basically proving on paper that you meet every standard. But the real test is the on-site inspection. This isn't a quick visit. It's usually a multi-day audit by a team of trained inspectors who are peers, experts from other accredited programs. They don't just read your documents, they review patient charts, they interview staff at all levels, they observe procedures in action, they verify that what you say you do in your SOPs is actually what happens day to day. If a program passes this intense scrutiny, they get accreditation, but only for 3 years. Then they have to go through it again. It forces continuous compliance and improvement.
Okay, so picture this. You've got this mature, robust, audited quality system, SCT, operating in many centers, built from the ground up. And running alongside it, you have this somewhat clunky, burdensome, top-down federal checklist, the REMS. Something had to give, right? The clinical community started pushing back.
They did, quite strongly. There was a growing consensus that the field had matured significantly since 2017. This really came to a head in a workshop hosted by the ASTCT in June 2023. It brought together clinicians, industry folks, and FDA representatives. The clear message from the clinical side was, look, we know how to manage CRS and ICANS now. The REM requirements, especially things like the proximity rule and individual product certifications, are redundant. They're creating barriers to access without adding significant safety value anymore.
And remarkably, the FDA listened. Their official announcement in June 2025 basically agreed. What was their stated reason for saying the REMS was no longer necessary?
Their rationale was explicitly based on that clinical maturation and the data. They stated that the REMS was no longer necessary to ensure that the benefits outweigh their risks. They pointed directly to the established management guidelines and extensive experience of the medical hematology oncology community in handling CRS and neurotoxicities. Essentially, the knowledge and tools, like using tocilizumab appropriately, had become standard practice. The REMS wasn't needed to force that anymore.
And did the safety data back that up? Were complication rates stable?
Yes. The FDA mentioned they had reviewed the adverse event reporting data over several years and found it was stable. This suggested that the risks were being effectively managed under the existing standard of care, which in many places was underpinned by systems like FACT. Dr. Peter Marks, the CBE director, also specifically highlighted a key goal. Removing the REMS would expedite the delivery of potentially curative treatments to patients and reduce burden on providers. That's a direct acknowledgement of those access barriers we discussed.
This really feels like the core of our deep dive today. The FDA effectively said, your system, the PACT system, is doing the job, perhaps even better than our REMS. Let's compare them directly. How did AFSTY meet or exceed the specific safety goals the REMS was designed for?
Okay, let's break it down. Take the main REMS objective. Site readiness and tocilizumab access. REMS required that product-specific certification and proof of tocilizumab on-site. FACT's approach is far more comprehensive. FACT accreditation requires documented, established provisions for emergency and ICU-level care, verified by peer inspectors. It demands protocols, trained staff, and access to all potentially needed drugs, tocilizumab, yes, but also steroids, fluids, pressors, seizure meds, all integrated into their audited clinical operations standards. It ensures a whole system is ready, not just one drug.
Right. A system versus a checklist item. What about ensuring the doctors and nurses knew what they were doing? REMS had training requirements, right?
REMS had basic training requirements, often fulfilled by reviewing materials. FACSI goes much deeper with its personnel qualifications and training standards. It requires specific educational backgrounds, documented experience, detailed training logs for specific procedures, and ongoing competency assessments for everyone: doctors, nurses, pharmacists, lab techs. It ensures sustained, verifiable expertise, not just a one-time check-the-box training.
And the goal of standardized processes. REMS impose a uniform set of rules.
FXT achieves a more robust and arguably more effective form of standardized processes. Instead of forcing everyone to follow the exact same external rulebook, XCT requires each accredited program to develop, validate, implement, and adhere to its own detailed, site-specific SOPs for everything. These internal SOPs are then integrated into that comprehensive QM program and audited regularly by external peers. This fosters internal ownership and allows for site-specific optimization while still ensuring rigorous standardization and control. It's a more resilient approach.
It really sounds like a shift from the FDA policing basic compliance to recognizing and trusting institutional excellence, verified by a third party like FCT.
That's a very good way to put it. They recognize that the quality standards developed by the experts in the field and verified through rigorous accreditation had become a more effective guarantor of safety than the original, more generic regulatory requirements.
So this whole episode feels like a perfect case study in what people call adaptive regulation, doesn't it?
It's a textbook example. Adaptive regulation is all about acknowledging that regulatory oversight shouldn't be static. It needs to evolve as a technology, and the field using it matures. We can see 3 clear phases in the CAR-T story.
Okay, walk us through phase 1.
Phase 1. Initial rollout, high uncertainty. This is 2017. The therapy is novel, real-world experience is limited outside of trials, the acute risks are scary. The FDA must impose strict, centralized control. That's the REMS with its ET-TSU, mandatory certification, tocilizumab access, proximity rules. It's about maximum precaution when things are new.
Makes sense. Then phase 2.
Phase 2. Maturation and self-regulation. This is the period from, say, 2018 to the early 2020s. The clinical community rapidly gains experience. More importantly, professional organizations like AFFACT establish and refine rigorous, comprehensive quality standards. Centers voluntarily seek accreditation, building robust internal systems that go way beyond the REMS minimums. They build their own verifiable quality infrastructure.
Now that leads us to phase 3, where we are now.
Phase 3. Regulatory adaptation and reliance. This is the June 2025 decision. The FDA looks at the accumulated data, sees the stable safety profile, acknowledges the effectiveness of the community-built quality systems like FACT, and concludes the original REMS is now redundant and burdensome. So the agency adapts. It removes the prescriptive REMS, signaling its trust in the institutionalized quality systems, and shifts its primary regulatory focus to the remaining major uncertainty, the long-term risks.
And by doing this, the FDA isn't just adapting, it's actively rewarding quality, isn't it?
Absolutely. It sends a powerful message. By lifting the administrative burden of the REMS, the FDA implicitly incentivizes institutions to invest in high-quality systems and pursue rigorous accreditation like FACT. It fosters a more collaborative model, essentially saying, if you demonstrate sustained excellence and build verifiable quality systems, we can streamline regulation for you, which ultimately helps everyone, especially patients waiting for access.
So let's talk about the immediate impact of dropping the REMS. What changed overnight for patients? The reduction in that logistical nightmare must be significant.
Oh, it's huge, especially for patients who don't live near a major treatment center. Removing those prescriptive REMS requirements directly tackles the financial and logistical barriers that were blocking access for many.
Let's recap those specific changes again. The mandatory 4-week stay near the hospital. Gone. What's the advice now?
Right, the mandate is gone. The advice is now generally for patients to remain relatively close, easily reachable, for about 2 weeks post-infusion. And similarly, the driving restriction, previously 8 weeks, is now also advised for just 2 weeks.
Cutting that proximity time from 4 weeks to 2, and the driving restriction from 8 weeks to 2 that halves the time needed for temporary lodging, halves the time a caregiver might need off work. That makes this therapy realistically achievable for so many more people.
Exactly. It's a massive step towards democratizing access. It removes a major socioeconomic hurdle and shifts the decision-making about post-infusion monitoring back to where it belongs: clinical judgment based on the individual patient's condition and progress, not a one-size-fits-all federal rule.
And what about the burden on the hospitals, the providers? Getting rid of those product-by-product certifications must simplify things.
Definitely. It removes a layer of administrative complexity and paperwork. Hospitals already certified and experienced with one CAR-T product can now potentially adopt new similar products more easily without going through a whole separate REMS certification maze for each one. This helps them keep pace as new therapies get approved, which is happening rapidly in this field.
Now, it's really crucial to stress. Removing the REMS doesn't mean safety oversight is gone. It's just shifted focus. What key safety requirements absolutely remain in place?
Two critical pillars remain unchanged. First, risk communication. Information about the serious risks, CRS, ICANS, still has to be clearly communicated. This is done through the prominent boxed warning on the product label, that's the FDA's strongest warning, and through the patient-friendly medication guide that must be provided. The risks aren't hidden. The responsibility for managing them is now fully with the informed clinical community.
Okay, clear communication remains. And the second pillar, the one addressing those long-term living drug concerns.
This is the big one, and it's absolutely non-negotiable for these types of therapies. The requirement for the manufacturers to conduct 15-year post-marketing observational safety studies remains firmly in place. This is often called long-term follow-up, or LTFU. This ensures ongoing monitoring for any delayed side effects, especially that potential risk of secondary cancers linked to insertional mutagenesis we discussed earlier.
15 years. That is an incredibly long time frame for regulatory follow-up. It really underscores the unique nature of these therapies.
It does. It shows that the FDA understands the science. The 15-year LTFU is the ultimate expression of adaptive oversight for CGTs. The FDA is essentially saying, we trust the clinical community, especially those with robust systems like FACT accreditation, to handle the short-term and medium-term risks effectively now. But the very long-term questions, those remain our responsibility to oversee working with the manufacturer because the science demands that decade-plus perspective. The regulatory focus has shifted smartly to where the biggest remaining uncertainties lie. #outro.
Wow. So this deep dive really mapped out a fascinating evolution, didn't it? We went from a very necessary but also very centralized and burdensome initial safety mandate, the REMS, with things like that 4-week proximity rule, to a system that relies heavily on professional self-regulation, on the quality systems built and verified by the community itself, exemplified by AppsDTA.
And the outcome is really a win-win, wouldn't you say? We see improved patient access, reduced burdens on everyone without sacrificing the core safety principles. It was possible because the clinical field demonstrated its maturity, built robust quality frameworks like FACT, and provided the evidence that allowed the FDA to confidently adapt its approach. It's a testament to institutionalized quality assurance.
So looking forward, what does this CAR story tell us about the future regulation of other advanced therapies?
I think the CAR-T journey offers a really valuable blueprint. It suggests a potential life cycle for regulating truly novel, complex therapies. You start with strict, centralized control, maybe a REMS when things are new and uncertain. Then, as the field matures and develops its own verifiable quality standards, like FACT, the regulator can transition, adapting its oversight. And finally, you maintain robust, non-negotiable long-term surveillance, like the 15-year LTFU, focused on the unique, enduring risks of the technology. It's a path from intense oversight to informed reliance.
That really sets up the final question for us, and for you listening. This ERT story shows it's possible. So the question becomes, what other advanced therapies, maybe currently operating under tight initial restrictions, are going to be next? Which fields are building the kind of mature, verifiable quality systems that might allow them to earn similar regulatory flexibility and improve access down the line? Something to think about as you continue your own deep dive.
This is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the audio content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously, Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures.